My son asked me for $180,000 on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen in Phoenix with his car keys still in his hand, like he wasn't planning to stay long enough to sit down. I had the envelope under my left palm on the counter. Plain brown, no writing on the front, the corner a little soft from being carried around in my purse for 9 days. He never looked at it. Ethan has a way of walking into a room and only seeing the thing he came for. And that afternoon, the thing he came for was my retirement. He'd brought a folder with him. He always brings a folder. This one had a glossy cover page with a logo he'd paid someone to design, and he set it down between us and turned it so it faced me, the way a salesman does. He talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Distribution rights, a warehouse in Tempe he already had a handshake on, a partner named Devin who'd done this before, and new people. He said the word conservative 4 times about the projections. He kept touching the watch on his wrist, turning it around, and I remember thinking that I'd never asked him how he paid for that watch because I already knew the answer was that I had, somewhere down the line, in some earlier version of this same conversation. Then he stopped and looked at me and said the number. 180. All of it, not part of it. And when I didn't answer right away, when I just stood there with my hand flat on that envelope, he leaned forward on his knuckles and said, "Mom, come on, you owe me this one." Oh. I've turned that word over 100 times since, and I still can't fully explain what it did to me. It didn't feel like a knife. It felt like a door closing somewhere far off in the house, quiet, final. The kind of sound you don't notice until later when you realize the air has changed. 26 years I worked in medical billing at the same office off Camelback. I know exactly what people owe and what they don't, down to the cent. And my own son was standing in my kitchen telling me the balance was in his favor. I didn't raise my voice. That surprised me more than anything. I looked at his face, at the crease between his eyebrows that he got from his father, and I heard myself say, "Before you say another word, there's something here I need you to read." And I slid the envelope across the counter. If stories like this one mean something to you, real people and the hard things that happen at real kitchen tables, take a second to like this video and subscribe. There are more of these, and I think you'll want to hear them. My name is Karen Walsh. I'm 55 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house in North Phoenix that's too big for me now. And until that Tuesday, I would have told anybody who asked that I had a good relationship with my only child. I was divorced when Ethan was 9. His father moved to Nevada and got progressively worse at remembering birthdays until he stopped altogether, and I spent the next 2 decades trying to be enough people at once. I worked full-time. I cooked on Sundays for the whole week. I sat in the parking lot of his high school for 40 minutes some afternoons because it was easier than going home to an empty house and waiting. And somewhere in there, without deciding to, I became the thing that catches him. First, it was small, a phone bill, a deposit on an apartment. Then it was a car after the accident that wasn't his fault, and then a car after one that was. Then the business with the food truck. Then the business after the food truck. Every single time I told myself the same thing, that this was the last one, that he was almost there, that a mother helps. I had $183,000 in that retirement account. It took me 26 years to build. It was supposed to be a small place in Prescott where it's cooler in the summer, and maybe a garden, and maybe some peace. Ethan is 32. He has my laugh and his father's hands, and he is the only family I have left in this world. And on that Tuesday afternoon in my kitchen, I had to decide whether I was willing to lose him in order to stop losing everything else. He picked up the envelope. He was still smiling when he opened it. He pulled the pages out with 2 fingers, the way you'd pull a receipt out of a bag, and I watched his eyes move across the first sheet and go flat. It wasn't what he expected. I know exactly what he expected, because I'd seen that face before, twice. in this same kitchen. He expected a check. He expected the thing where his mother sighs and shakes her head and says, "She doesn't know how she's going to make this work," and then does it anyway. And then he hugs her a little too hard and leaves within 10 minutes. What he had in his hand was a spreadsheet. Columns, dates, amounts, a description in the last field. 11 pages of it, printed on my own printer at 4 in the morning on a Sunday because that was the only time I could look at it without my hands shaking. He flipped to the second page, then the third. He laughed, one short sound with no humor in it at all, and said, "What is this? Is this supposed to be funny?" "Keep reading," I said. The air conditioner kicked on above us. My coffee was still sitting there, going cold, half an inch left in the bottom, and his glossy folder with the logo was on the counter between us like something nobody had claimed. He kept turning pages. He was standing exactly where he'd been standing for the last 20 minutes. But something in his shoulders had changed, and I remember noticing that and feeling almost nothing about it, which frightened me more than the conversation did. To understand what those 11 pages were, you have to go back a long way, further than the food truck, further than the cars. You have to go back to a boy in a Suns jersey sitting on the front steps of a house in North Phoenix in July, waiting for a father who'd said Saturday and meant nothing at all. Ethan was 9 when Richard left. He didn't leave in a dramatic way. There was no shouting, no scene the neighbors could talk about. He took a job in Henderson and he took most of the good furniture, and for about a year he called every couple of weeks. And then it got to be once a month, and then it got to be Christmas. By the time Ethan was 14, his father was a name on a card with $20 in it, and by the time he was 17, there wasn't a card. And I decided, without ever once saying it out loud to another human being, that my son was not going to feel the difference. That was the whole project of my 30s and 40s. Whatever that man took out of that boy's life, I was going to put back in, and I was going to do it alone, and nobody was ever going to be able to say that Ethan Walsh grew up with less. So I worked. I was at the medical billing office off Camelback by 7 every morning, and I picked up the extra coding certification so I could take the harder accounts, because the harder accounts paid more. I learned to sleep 5 hours and be fine. I made his lunches the night before. I went to every single game, and when I couldn't go, I paid a neighbor's kid to film it on a camcorder so I could watch it at 11 at night with the sound off so I wouldn't wake him. I want to be honest about something, because if I'm not honest about it, then none of the rest makes sense. I liked being needed. There was a version of me in those years that felt taller walking through that house, because in that house I was the one holding everything up. A woman whose husband leaves can spend a long time looking for proof that she's enough. I found mine in that boy. Every time I fixed something for him, I got a little of that proof back. The first time I gave him money that wasn't just being his mother, he was 19. His phone got shut off. He was living with 2 roommates in an apartment near the community college, and he called me from one of their phones, embarrassed, talking fast, and he said it was a mix-up with the autopay. I put $430 on that account, and I remember standing in the hallway afterward with the phone still in my hand, feeling something close to happy. He'd called me. He was 20 minutes into being an adult, and he'd called me. Then it was a security deposit, $1,100 when the roommates fell through. That one I actually had budgeted. Then it was the insurance on the Civic. Then it was the insurance again. Then it was the transmission on the Civic, which was $1,400 and which I paid in 3 installments on a credit card I didn't tell anyone about. None of those things were unreasonable. That's the part people don't understand when they hear a story like mine and want to know why I didn't just stop. Nobody hands you the whole thing at once. Nobody comes to you at 19 and asks for your retirement. They come to you for $430 and they sound ashamed about it. And you help? Because helping is what you've been doing since he was born, and you don't have another setting. Here's the strange part, and I've thought about this more than I've thought about almost anything else. I wrote all of it down. Not on purpose, not as evidence. I've spent 26 years in medical billing, where the entire job is knowing what was charged, what was paid, and what's still open. And somewhere along the line that stopped being a job and became a reflex. Every time money left my hands, I put it in the same green notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer with the batteries and the takeout menus. Date, amount, what it was for. Sometimes a note. Phone, says autopay. Tires, will pay back Friday. I never added it up, not once in 13 years. There's a reason for that, and I didn't understand it until the night I finally did add it up, sitting at that same counter with a calculator and a glass of wine I didn't drink. Some part of me had known the whole time that the total was a number I would not be able to unsee. And I was right about that. He got to page 4 and stopped. I knew which page it was without looking, because page 4 is where the amounts stop having 3 digits. He read it the way people read something in a language they used to speak. Then he set the pages down on the counter, not gently, and looked up at me with his mouth slightly open. "You kept a list," he said. "You've been keeping a list. Of me." "I kept a record," I said. "It's what I do. I've done it since before you were born. For 13 years, Mom. Longer than that." He put both hands on the back of the bar stool and leaned on it. "This is insane. You get that, right? This is what parents do. You're supposed to help your kid. That's the whole thing. That's the job." He gestured at the pages without touching them. "And you were sitting here the whole time writing it down like I'm a customer who didn't pay." I didn't answer him. There's a reason I didn't answer him, and it isn't that I didn't have anything to say. It's that I'd rehearsed this conversation for 9 days in the car, in the shower, lying awake at 2 in the morning, and in every single rehearsal I'd argued with him, and in every single rehearsal I'd lost. So I stood there with my hands on the counter and let the silence do what I couldn't. He went back to the pages, and while he read, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing in a parking lot in Mesa in 106 degrees, holding a set of keys and crying, because I was so proud of him I could barely breathe. He was 24. He'd come to the house on a Sunday with a notebook, actually handwritten that time, and a plan for a taco truck. Not a restaurant, a truck. "Lower overhead," he said. He'd worked 2 years at a place on 7th Street, and he knew the kitchen side, and he had a friend who did the wrap and design, and he'd found a 2006 step van in Casa Grande that needed a new compressor, but was otherwise solid. And here's the thing I need you to understand about my son. He isn't lazy. People hear a story like this one and they picture some man on a couch, and that's not him, and it never was. When Ethan is inside the first 90 days of something, there is nobody on this earth who works harder. He was up at 4. He was scrubbing that truck out with a hose in the driveway at 11 at night. He learned the permit process for Maricopa County better than the woman at the counter knew it. He came alive. It cost $28,000 by the time it was on the road. I took a home equity loan on this house to do it. I want to say that plainly, because for a long time I told the story a different way, even to myself. I said I helped him get started. What I did was borrow against the only thing I owned on a 15-year term at 51 years old, so that my son could have a truck. And for 4 months it worked. He had a route. He did the office park off Priest on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there was a brewery in Tempe that had him on weekends. And one Saturday, I drove out there and stood in line like a customer, and he saw me and made me a plate he wouldn't let me pay for. And I ate it sitting on a curb with my shoes off, and I thought, that's it. That's the last of it. He's standing on his own now, and I helped him get there. My sister Deb called me the following week from Tucson. Deb is 4 years older than me, and she has never in her life softened anything. She said, "How much?" I told her 28. There was a long pause on that phone, and then she said, "Karen, you're not helping him. You're paying him to stay 19." I hung up on her. I actually hung up on my own sister, and then I sat in the car in the grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes with my face burning, telling her all the things I should have said. That she doesn't have kids. That she doesn't know what it's like to be the only one. That Ethan didn't have what other kids had, and this was me evening it out. Finally, the way it should have been evened out 20 years ago by a man who was in Nevada not answering his phone. We didn't speak for 5 months. The truck stopped running in October. Not mechanically. The brewery changed management. The office park route dried up in the summer heat. And Ethan started missing days. And then started missing weeks. When I asked, he had reasons. And the reasons were always about other people. The commissary kitchen was gouging him. The health inspector had it out for him. Devin, who was around even then, was supposed to handle the social media and didn't. I stopped asking, because every time I asked, he got quiet in a way that scared me. He'd go 2, 3 days without picking up. And I had this thought that I have never fully forgiven myself for, which was, if I push him on this, I'll lose him. And if I lose him, I have nobody. So I let it go. In February, the woman who lives 2 doors down, Marjorie, mentioned in the driveway that she'd seen the truck listed online back before Christmas. "Sold," she said. She'd only noticed because of the artwork. I didn't say anything to her. I said something about the weather, and I went inside and I sat down on the edge of my bed with my coat still on. He'd sold it in November for $9,000. He never told me. The loan on my house had 11 years left on it that afternoon, and it has 8 years left on it today. And every single month since then, on the 14th. $406 leaves my account for a taco truck that hasn't existed in 6 years. I didn't confront him about it. Not then. I opened the drawer, I took out the green notebook, and I wrote the date and the number and, in the last column, 4 words. Truck. Sold it. Something changed in his face around page 6. And I watched him decide to stop arguing about the pages. "Okay," he said. He pushed them a few inches away from himself. "Okay, so you're angry. I get it. You've been sitting on this for a long time and you're angry at me. And fine, you're allowed." He nodded a few times like he was agreeing with someone who wasn't in the room. "But you want to talk about what things cost? Let's talk about what it cost me to grow up in this house." "Ethan, no, you brought receipts, so let's do receipts." He wasn't shouting. That's the part that stays with me. He was talking the way you'd talk to a difficult customer. "I was 9, Mom. He walked out and I was 9 and I didn't get a dad, and you can put whatever number you want on a spreadsheet, it doesn't cover that. Other guys my age got handed a business. They got a down payment at 25. I got a father in Henderson who couldn't remember what grade I was in." He let that sit for a second. "And you never once asked me if I was okay," he said. "You just worked." I want to tell you that I had an answer ready. I didn't. That one went in clean, right under the ribs, because there was enough truth in it to make the rest of it stick. I had worked. There were years I was so tired I don't remember them. There were nights I came home and put a plate in front of him and asked about his day and heard about a quarter of the answer. And he knew that. He'd known it for a long time. He'd known it the way you know where a bruise is on your own body. That was never an accident. And it took me until I was 55 to understand it. If you're still with me, thank you. I know this isn't an easy one to sit through. A like and a subscribe helps more than you'd think. After the truck, Ethan moved back into his old room. It was supposed to be 6 weeks while he figured out his next step. It was 8 months. And they weren't bad months, honestly. That's the part nobody tells you. He cooked twice a week, actual cooking, and we watched terrible reality shows on Thursdays, and he'd narrate them in different voices until I couldn't breathe from laughing. He fixed the sprinkler line in the back that I'd been living around for 2 years. There were evenings in that house that were the happiest I'd been since he was a boy. That's the hook in it. If it had been all bad, I'd have walked away in a year. Nobody stays for all bad. He was 27 when he came to me with the consulting idea. That's what he called it, consulting. And when I asked what he'd be consulting on, he talked for a while about small business logistics, and I nodded and understood about a third of it. He needed $12,000 for software licenses and a lawyer to set up the entity and 6 months of runway. I didn't have $12,000 sitting anywhere. What I had was a retirement account with a loan provision I'd never touched, and a plan administrator who explained the terms to me on the phone in a tone that suggested she'd made this exact call 1,000 times. I took $9,000 out. I told him it was 12 so he wouldn't come back for the difference. And I covered the rest by not doing anything about the air conditioning that summer, which is a thing you can technically survive in Phoenix if you're stubborn and you sleep with wet towels. The entity got registered. There's a certificate for it somewhere. As far as I know, there was never a single client. By then, something had shifted in the way we talked about money, and it happened so gradually I couldn't point to the day. He stopped saying, "Can you?" He started saying, "I need you to." He stopped explaining afterward what had happened to it, and when I asked, the questions themselves became the offense. I'd ask about the consulting, and he'd say, "Do you want a report? Should I file a report with you?" And then he'd be short with me for 3 days, and I would spend those 3 days feeling like I'd done something ugly. That's the mechanism. I've had a lot of time to look at it since. It isn't yelling and it isn't threats. It's just that asking costs you something every time until you stop asking. I turned 50 on a Tuesday in May. Deb and I were talking again by then. She'd shown up at my door 6 months earlier with a casserole and no apology, which is how Deb apologizes. And she wanted to drive up and do something. I told her Ethan had it handled. He'd said he had it handled. He'd said, "50 is a big one, Mom, let me do this." He came at 8:40 that night. He'd been at a thing with Devin, some networking event that ran long, and he brought a bottle of wine that I later found out came from my own cabinet because he'd grabbed it on his way through the kitchen. We sat at that counter, and he was warm and funny, and he told me about a guy he'd met who was doing something with reclaimed pallets. At around 10:15, he asked me for $3,000. I said yes. Of course I said yes, and he hugged me, and he told me I was the best thing in his life, and he meant it, and I need people to understand that he meant it, because that's what makes it so hard. He left before 11. I stood in the kitchen and washed 2 wine glasses and looked out the window over the sink at the house across the street, where the Feldmans had their porch light on, and I remember thinking that this was what 50 looked like, and that I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't going to touch. Then I opened the drawer, took out the green notebook, and wrote it down. 3,000. May 14th. And in the last column, because I couldn't help myself, I wrote, birthday. He found the last page of the spreadsheet. There's a line at the bottom of it, bolded, because that's how I've formatted every report I've ever produced in 26 years. He looked at it for a while. Then he said the number out loud, quietly, almost like a question. 214,680. And 40 cents, I said. Mom. He rubbed his face with both hands. When he brought them down, he was different again, softer, and his eyes were wet. And I don't believe for 1 second that was performance. That's the thing about my son. He isn't a con man. He's something harder to deal with than a con man, because a con man knows what he's doing. Mom, why are you doing this today? I came here about the warehouse. I have a deadline on the warehouse. I know. So why now? After all this time, why now? And that was a fair question, and it had an answer. And the answer was a Sunday in April, 11 weeks before he stood in my kitchen. Deb had a birthday thing at her place in Tucson. Nothing big. Some neighbors, a folding table in the backyard, string lights she'd had up since Christmas. Ethan drove down separately because he had something in the morning. He was good that day. He carried chairs. He charmed Deb's neighbor into telling the story about the coyote in the pool for the 4th time in as many years. Around 7, I went inside to find a knife for the cake, and he was standing in the hallway by the laundry room on the phone, facing away from me, and he didn't hear me because the ice machine was running. He said, "She'll do it. She always does." Then he laughed at whatever Devin said back, and he said, "It's my money eventually anyway. She's just sitting on it." I stood there in my sister's hallway with a cake knife in my hand. He came out 2 minutes later and put his arm around my shoulders and walked me back outside. And I sang happy birthday to my sister, and I ate a piece of cake, and I drove home 2 hours on the I-10 in the dark. And I did not cry. Which I only mention because everyone assumes that's the part where you cry. Here's what I actually did. I went home and I got out the folder from the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I'd been quietly building for 1.5 years, and I looked at it for a long time. Prescott. There's a street up there called Willow Creek, where the houses are small and old and the trees are real trees, and it's 20 degrees cooler in July than it is here. I'd been up there 4 times. I had printouts. I had a page where I'd worked out, line by line, what I'd need. The sale of this house, my retirement, 11 more years of work, and a social security number I'd already run through the calculator twice. Except the sale of this house doesn't work the way it used to, because there's a home equity loan sitting on it with 8 years left. And every month, $406 of my life goes to a taco truck in somebody else's driveway. I sat there, and I did the thing I had avoided doing for 13 years. I got the green notebook out of the kitchen drawer, and I opened a spreadsheet and I entered every line. It took me until almost 4 in the morning. I stopped twice. When I typed the last entry and the total populated at the bottom of the column, I sat back in that chair and I looked at it and I said, out loud, in an empty house, "Oh, $214,000, more than the account he wanted, more than the house is worth." 26 years of somebody's working life, and it wasn't his. I called Deb the next morning at 6. I told her the number, and then I told her the hallway. She was quiet a long time, which is not like her. Then she said, "Karen, what happens to you in 15 years? And I said I didn't know. She said, "No, I need you to actually answer it. You're 68. It's July. What happens?" I couldn't answer her because we both already knew. I'd be in this house with a loan on it and no savings, and a 50-year-old son who had never once in his life had a reason to stand up. Because every single time he started to fall, I got underneath him. She said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you're allowed to have a life that isn't about him." You've never once believed that. She was right. I never had. Somewhere back in a driveway in 2002, I'd decided that a good mother is a woman who is used up completely. And I'd been proving it for 20 years, and my son had learned it right alongside me. He wasn't a villain. He was a man raised by someone who taught him, with every single yes, that she would always be there to absorb it. The attorney's office was in a low tan building off Bell Road, with a fountain out front that wasn't running. Her name was Rosa Delgado, and she was maybe 40, and she had reading glasses pushed up in her hair and a coffee cup that said, "World's Okayest Golfer." I put the spreadsheet on her desk and I said, "I need to know what my options are." She read for 11 minutes without saying a word. Then she took the glasses down out of her hair and said, "Okay, some of this is emotional and I can't help you with that, but some of it is legal. And that part I can do quite a lot with. More than you probably think." I saw her 3 times over the next month. On the last visit, I signed 6 documents. She notarized 2 of them herself and had a young man from the front desk witness the others, and she put the whole set in a plain brown envelope and slid it across the desk to me, and she said, "You don't have to use this, but once he opens it, you can't close it again." The envelope was in my purse for 9 days. On the 9th day, Ethan called and said he was coming by Tuesday, and he sounded happy, and he said he had news about the warehouse. "Why now?" he'd asked me. I said, "Because I heard you in Deb's hallway." He didn't ask what I meant. That's how I knew he remembered saying it. He looked at the counter and his jaw moved, and he said, "That was a conversation with Devin. You don't take a business conversation out of context and—" "Turn the page, Ethan." Behind the spreadsheet there was a document with a heading in bold capitals and a signature line at the bottom, and my name was already on it, and the line under his was empty. He read it twice. "A promissory note," he said, "for $214,680.40. No interest. $200 a month for the rest of your life, starting the 1st of next month." I heard my own voice doing the thing it does at work when I explain a balance to somebody who doesn't want to hear it, level and unhurried. "At that rate, you'll finish when you're 121. I know that. It isn't about getting it back." "Then what is it about?" "It's about you signing your name to something true." He laughed, and it came out wrong, a sound with the air knocked out of it. "You want me to sign a debt to my own mother?" "I want it to have a number. Everything else in your life has a number. This is the only thing you've ever gotten that didn't, and that's my fault. And I'm fixing my part of it." He put that page down and picked up the next one, and I watched him work through the language. It's 4 pages, and I'll say it as simply as Rosa said it to me. 6 weeks ago, my retirement account stopped being a pile of money I could hand somebody. It's structured now. It pays me every month starting at 62, for as long as I'm here, and there is no version of any afternoon where I sit down and write a check for the balance of it, because the balance isn't a thing that exists anymore. He said, "This says it's irrevocable." "That's right. Mom." He was blinking fast. "The warehouse. I have a deadline," I told Devin. "There's no money, Ethan. Not because I said no, because I made it so I can't say yes." I don't think he understood it right away. He kept turning back to the first page of it like the terms were going to have changed. And then he got to the 4th document, and I watched him stop breathing for a second, because that one wasn't about money at all. It was a listing agreement for this house. "You're selling," he said, "in September. Marjorie's daughter-in-law is handling it. You're selling the house I grew up in." "I'm selling a house with a loan on it that I took out for a truck that got sold in November 6 years ago for $9,000, I said. "And I'm going to pay off that loan, and I'm going to buy something small in Prescott on a street with real trees on it, and I'm going to live there." That was the moment he stopped being sad. He came around the end of the counter. He didn't touch me, and he's never once in his life raised a hand to me, but he came close enough that I could smell the coffee on him, and he said, "Do you have any idea how this looks? 55 years old, and you're cutting off your only kid so you can go play house in the mountains. Who talks you into something like this? Aunt Deb? Some lawyer who bills you by the hour and doesn't care what happens to this family? Nobody talked me into it. You're going to be up there alone, Mom." He said it slowly so I'd feel each word land. "You get that, right? No grandkids coming up on the weekend? Nobody checking on you. You do this, and you're going to sit up there by yourself, and you're going to remember that you chose it." And there it was. The last thing in the drawer. The one he'd never had to use before, because he'd never needed to. 20 years I'd have paid anything to not hear that sentence. I reached over and took the last page out from under his hand, because it wasn't a legal document and I didn't want him reading it in front of me. It was 1 page, handwritten, and it said that I love him, and that I'm proud of the 4 months he ran that truck the way most people are proud of a whole career, and that I'm sorry for every single time I got underneath him when he was falling, because I thought I was catching him, and what I was actually doing was making sure he never learned the ground was there. And it said the door in Prescott would always be open to him for dinner, for a weekend, for a hard year. Just never again for a check. I folded it and held it. "You can have this when you're ready for it," I said. "Not today." He stood there. The air conditioner shut off and the house got very quiet, and my son looked around my kitchen like he'd never been in it, at the glossy folder with the logo on it that nobody had touched in half an hour, at the 11 pages, at the cold coffee. And then he said, in a completely different voice, small and young and honestly bewildered, "What am I supposed to do now?" 32 years old. 13 years of asking me for things. And that was the first question my son had ever asked me that didn't have a number attached to it. I smiled. I couldn't help it, and I didn't want to help it. And I know how that must have looked to him, standing there with his whole plan in pieces on my counter. But he wasn't asking me to fix it. He was asking what he should do. Do you understand what that is? That's the sound a person makes right before they stand up. "I don't know," I said. "That's yours now." He picked up his keys. He got to the door and stopped with his hand on it, and he didn't turn around. And he said one more thing to me that I have thought about every day since. What he said, with his hand on the door and his back to me, was, "I hope the trees are worth it." Then he left, and the house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway. He didn't call in June. He didn't call in July, which was the month I always made the ribs, or in August, when he turned 33, and I sent a message that showed as delivered and nothing else. Marjorie's daughter-in-law put the sign up on the 9th of September, and the house sold in 11 days to a young couple with a baby. And I stood in the empty living room afterward and looked at the mark on the wall where the couch had been for 23 years, and then I locked the door and left the keys in the lockbox. Willow Creek is a narrow street, and my house is the second smallest on it. 2 bedrooms, a porch that faces east, and a backyard with a juniper in it older than I am. Deb drove up for the first weekend, and we unpacked the kitchen wrong and had to do half of it again. I found the green notebook in a box marked Miss, and I didn't open it. I put it in the bottom drawer of the desk, because throwing it away would have made it into a bigger thing than it was, and it isn't a bigger thing anymore. It's just a record of a woman who loved somebody badly for a while. I planted rosemary along the side of the porch in October. It took, which surprised me. The envelope came on a Tuesday in November. My name in his handwriting, which slants hard to the right and always has, since 3rd grade. Inside was a money order for $200 and the promissory note, signed and dated at the bottom on a line that had been empty in my kitchen in June. No letter, not one word. I sat down on the porch step in a sweater, in weather cool enough to need one, and I held that piece of paper in both hands for a long time. He had a job by then. I found that out later from Deb, who heard it from him, which tells you something in itself. Nothing glamorous, nothing with a logo. He gets up early and he comes home tired, and as far as I know, he has not once told anybody that his mother is sitting on money that's basically his. I mailed him the letter that week, the handwritten one, the one I wouldn't let him read in June. He hasn't answered it yet, and it's been 4 months. And I've made my peace with the fact that he might not. And I've also made my peace with the fact that he might. There are 2 chairs on my porch. I bought them at an estate sale in Chino Valley for $60 for the pair, and one of them is usually empty. And that's all right. Empty isn't the same as gone. Empty means there's a place kept. If you took the long way through this with me, thank you. To anybody sitting in a kitchen tonight with a number in their head and a person they love on the other side of it, I'd only say this: you can be a good mother and still be a person with a life. Those were never 2 different women. There's another story I've been carrying around for a while about a woman I worked with for 19 years and what she found in her husband's truck the week before she was going to retire. I'll tell you that one soon.